the front office and the entire ownership group has support of Mickey Callaway as our manager. Mickey's our manager now.
Oh, you gotta
Mickey's
be kidding me.
Going forward.
There's no way this is going to work out. This has been the craziest week I've ever seen from the Mets in a long, long time. Will they or won't they? Will they or won't they? That is the big question right now when it comes to the New York Mets. Welcome aboard, everybody, here to the Sports Talk Nation. Michael Cohen here with you. And on this edition of the Sports Talk Nation podcast, a very short podcast here, we're going to kind of recap here what happened here with this past week with the New York Mets. And it has been, as I said in the intro, it has been one of the wildest weeks we have seen for the Mets in quite some time. You start going back to last Saturday, when the Mets were one hit by the Miami Marlins, then following that up with a two-hit loss to Miami on Sunday. You're talking about back-to-back games where the Mets only had 3 total hits in 2 games against what at the time was the worst team in the National League, in the Miami Marlins. And the thought was that Mickey Callaway was going to lose his job, that he was going to be fired. And it was just a question of hours, for that matter, as the Mets were expecting, and Met fans were expecting an announcement to be made on Monday. As we know, Brodie and Wagenen came out, endorsed Mickey Callaway as the manager for the foreseeable future. We'll get into that point in a moment, but since that time, it has been craziness since. The Mets have gone 4-1. They swept the Washington Nationals in 4 straight games, and then ended up losing last night to the Detroit Tigers. But they're getting performances and key hits from guys that were really unlikely heroes. You know, J.D. Davis with a big home run earlier this week. Carlos Gomez with a big 3-run home run to give the Mets a win against the Nationals. Adeiny Hechavarria with a big home run last night against Detroit. And then Aaron Altier, who was just picked up just the other day. In fact, signed on Thursday, made his first appearance as a Met on Friday night. He hit a home run. So you're getting all these good performances, these big clutch hits from guys that you would not have thought would be delivering for the Mets. And as a result, the team has won 4 of the last 5. We'll see how they do here on Saturday against the Detroit Tigers, as they are playing them this afternoon. But does the winning make things feel a little bit better for the Mets? A little bit. You know, it's nice to see the team win some games here. You like the way they responded after that bad road trip in Miami and in Washington with the sweep of the Nationals. And it was a competitive game. A game that could have won, probably should have won against Detroit last night, but nevertheless, they are 24-26. If you want to look at this thing glass half full, all right, and this is where we're going to get into the manager in just a second. If you want to look at this thing glass half full, you can look at it like this. The standings in the National League, there really isn't a lot of separation. And outside of the LA Dodgers, who are 33-18 in the West, everyone's kind of bunched together. You take a look at the Wild, you take a look, Atlanta hasn't been that great. They're 29-23. Milwaukee's 29-23, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, kind of hovering around 500. San Diego's hovering around 500. Arizona, just a game over 500. Colorado, a couple of games under 500. So, not to sit here and say that the Mets have a legitimate chance, because I have my doubts about it, but they do theoretically have a chance. It is Memorial Day weekend. This is when you start to look at the standings and you start to get an idea of what your team's going to be. And, yeah, the Mets are in a position where they can make some noise, where they can do some damage, if they can get help, if they can start to hit and start to play consistent baseball. And that's the big question. That's where we get into the manager. And that's where I have to wonder, you know, what is the Met logic here? Are they looking at the standings as I just did and saying, hey, you know, we're still technically in this thing, you know, let's give our manager a chance. But what does that mean when they say, and when Brodie and Wagenen says, foreseeable future? It could mean one of two things. It could mean to be announced, that Mickey Callaway is going to be the manager of the New York Mets until further notice, which means if this team does have another bad losing streak, plays bad baseball for a while, there could be a change at some point down the road. Doesn't sound like the Mets are adverse to it. It just means it's just not going to happen right now. Or it could mean, look, we are going to stand by our manager for the rest of this year, He still has another year left on his contract after this year. Mickey Callaway is our manager for 2019, and we'll discuss beyond that at a later date. And you can understand that support would come from the idea that there really isn't a lot of big names out there. Yes, there's a Joe Girardi out there, but he's not going to come here to manage the Mets. There isn't a lot out there that the Mets could bring in that would be that much better than what you have now with Mickey Callaway. I mean, you're talking about Jim Riggleman, who's the bench coach, who has a record under 500. Buck Showalter, I know he's out there, he's a free agent, but again, there's a guy who had some bad years with the Orioles before he got fired at the end of last year. Dusty Baker's now 70 years old. Does he still want to do this at this point? I have no idea. So I could understand where they're looking at from that standpoint, saying he's going to be our manager for the rest of this year. This year, but you have to wonder of the what if factor right now if you're the Mets with Mickey Callaway, and that's the thing that you have to wonder right now with the Mets, because they do have a tough stretch coming up. After this series against Detroit, they have the Dodgers and the Diamondbacks on the road, a 7-game road trip out west. That's never easy. And then after a 6-game homestand against San Francisco and Colorado, they get the Yankees, the Cardinals, the Braves, the Cubs, and the Phillies, and the Braves, and the Yankees, and the Phillies. This is all going into the All-Star break. Okay, you get the point. They're going to see some good teams here throughout the month of June into July. And if the Mets are floundering or starting to look like a team that's not going to be in it by the All-Star break, do they make the move then and fire Mickey Callaway and just go with Jim Riggleman for the rest of this year? So that's the problem I have with the decision to just stand pat and say, hey, look, we're going to give our vote of confidence to the manager right now, because it makes it look like you're in a situation where you're not going anywhere. You're not going to make the playoffs. This is not the right manager for this team, but you don't want to make the move right now. So if that's the case, you might as well just make the move, in my mind. Another thing that, Brodie Van Wagenen said was that he wanted to take that this was a team effort, that there has to be some responsibility for himself for the team that he built. And by doing that, and by supporting his manager, he's basically putting a lot on his shoulders right now as a first-year general manager. Remember, this is a guy who doesn't have a lot of baseball, if any, baseball executive experience. And I talked about this in the preseason with Rick Luck, and I'm going to put the link in the video here, that there are a lot of things that he did during the offseason that I was very worried about. And one of those moves was bringing in Robinson Cano. Now, I know early in the first week of the season, looked great. Cano hit a home run in his first at-bat with the Mets, but, let's be honest. I mean, he hasn't been that great. He's hitting .241. Only 3 home runs, 13 RBIs. Got injured just in this last week. He's now on the injured list, and of course the whole thing with not running out baseballs out in the first baseline. The Mets have him for another 4 years, and that's a bad contract that they ate in that trade. Then you take a look at the Jed Lowry situation that as free agent that Brodie Van Wagenen brought in. Hasn't played for this team. Still is injured. And we don't know what his timetable is going to be. Wilson Ramos, other than a couple of moments here and there, looks out of shape at times, overweight. But he has had his struggles at the plate as well. So there have been some questionable moves, even in the bullpen, bringing back Jerry Smilia, who has had a horrible season this year. Questionable moves made by the general manager. And when he comes out there and says, we're going to do this as a team, and this is all a team effort, and, we're all going to take the blame for this, well, he's basically putting the bullseye on his own back. And it's kind of a notice to the owners and the Wilpons saying, hey, this thing just falls apart. You go right ahead, and you make a change if you feel you need to at the end of this season. So that's where I have a bit of an issue with what Brodie Van Wagenen said this past week in regards to the manager. One, it's kind of wishy-washy where they are with the manager right now. It get the feeling that they could go ahead and if they want to fire him, they're going to do it anyway. They just don't want to do it right now. And two, by putting all the onus on himself, and he is responsible for a lot of the things that have gone on here, it gives the Wilpons reason to get rid of him and maybe move on from him at the end of the season if things do not turn around here for the Mets. One thing I want to discuss before we leave here today is I want to talk a little bit about Yoenis Cespedes. This was also announced on Monday as well from Van Wagenen, and that is that Cespedes broke his right ankle, multiple fractures in his right ankle after falling. Some people thought he fell off a horse. Some people thought he fell into a hole. that really isn't too clear. It sounds like he fell into some kind of hole at a ranch in Port St. Lucie, but the fact is, he is now out for the season, and the train of thought was that he would have a chance to come back this year. Remember, he was coming off of heel surgery from last year that cost him almost all of last season, and now he was hoping to be back maybe by September of this year. You can forget that now. He is now out for the rest of this year, and who knows what his prognosis is going to be for next year. The thing with Cespedes is, what can the Mets do as far as collecting on some of the insurance and recouping some of the money? Cespedes is due $29 million this year. He's due $29 million next year. So the Mets have to work with Cespedes and get that resolved in short order, and soon. Obviously, they'll have some time here to figure that out. But you will not see Yoenis Cespedes in a Met uniform probably ever again. It was a 4-year contract that he signed back in 2016. The Mets were hoping that to build off of the success they had with him for a couple years at the end of 2015, when he came via the Detroit Tigers in a trade, sparked that offense, sparked that team to a playoff berth as they would go on to the World Series eventually in 2015. Feels like a billion years ago now, doesn't it? Man. And then in 2016, they would get a wild card berth that year, and since that time, it's been downhill as he has battled injuries, and as this team has really gone downhill ever since. So his time in New York was brief. It was like a shooting star in a lot of ways. It was really great, and then it was kaput. It was over. And that's the case here with Cespedes with the New York Mets. So moving forward, you take a look at his team as we look at it right now, it's really a sub-500 team. Even if they got Cespedes back at the end of the year, it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. This team, I don't see it being that good enough to be competitive, and that's why I have to wonder, what are the Mets' plans moving forward? What are they going to do? When are they going to do it? As far as the manager is concerned and as far as their personnel is concerned, because I think they're kind of a sub-500 team. Maybe they'll get to 80 wins. Maybe it'll be 75 wins. They'll be in that range, but they just don't have enough, in my mind, on paper to get the job done. They had a nice week. I'm happy that they finally won some games. We'll see if they can win a series here against the Detroit Tigers, and then we'll be moving on to L.A., and Arizona after that. Will not be an easy trip, as I mentioned earlier. And also, of course, the big stretch of games with the Phillies and the Braves and the Cardinals, the Yankees, all those big teams coming up very, very soon. So remember, folks, thank you all for tuning in and listening. Like and subscribe right here to the Sports Talk Nation right here on YouTube. Your home for everything New York, New Jersey sports, of course. And remember to follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/OpenMicProgram, and like us and follow us on Twitter @OpenMicNJ. Folks, thank you for tuning in and listening, and have a great Memorial Day weekend. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Sports Talk Nation.